Hi folks, HR Funk here. I've mentioned in the past that periodically I'm contacted by manufacturers who request that I review various products that they produce here on the channel. And most of the time, none of you ever know anything about those requests because I just delete them from my email and go on to the next email. And there are really three reasons for that. Either the product is something that I'm not interested in, or it's something I don't think any of you are going to be all that interested in, or in some cases, maybe it's a product that I just don't feel personally qualified to review and evaluate. But occasionally I come across one of those email requests that is a product that I am interested in, I think all of you might be interested in, and it's also something that I do feel qualified to evaluate. And that's the case with the product that I'm going to be talking about today, which is produced by an Australian manufacturer, and it's called Virtual Shot. As a longtime firearms instructor, I have had the opportunity to watch the evolution of the so-called firearms training simulators from their infancy all the way up to today's systems, which are very sophisticated and capable of some truly remarkable feats. And I have many hours undergoing that type of training and also conducting that type of training. In fact, recently I was undergoing training, and the system we were using was so advanced that we were able to set it up on an indoor range with a big screen. And with this system, we could use our duty sidearms and live ammunition, and the system was so advanced that when we would fire at the on-screen images, the system could detect where those shots struck, and depending upon the shot placement, the on-screen images would react to the shot just as an actual individual might, and the person undergoing training had to then react properly to whatever the on-screen images were doing. So very advanced, and this type of training is good for not only marksmanship, but also reinforcing legal aspects of firearms use, judgmental aspects, use of cover, and they can be very beneficial when it comes to particularly working with the armed professional and improving that person's skills, which is why when I saw Virtual Shot was essentially a home firearms training simulator, I wanted to take a look at this system so I could let all of you know what I think about it. So as of July of 2022, the Virtual Shot comes in two different variations. One is the Picatinny mount, which you see here, that's intended for use with rifles and shotguns. There is also a pistol mount that attaches to the utility rail on the dust cover of many pistols. The Picatinny mount retails for just shy of $100 US, and the pistol mount retails for about $130, so it's a little bit more. The Virtual Shot mobile phone shooting simulation system actually consists of two different components. One is the mount that you see here, and as I said before, this is the Picatinny mount that's intended for rifles and carbines, and it has an eyepiece with a lens inside and a clamp to hold your phone, and it attaches on the existing Picatinny rail. With this particular mount, once the phone is placed inside, it gives you a virtual shooting experience when looking through the lens and watching the images that are on the phone screen. As you can see, in this instance, I was able to mount the Picatinny mount behind the existing red dot sight on my rifle here. And I'm going to go into some mounting issues a little bit later, but I wanted to give you a look at how this thing is all set up to begin with. So here is a look at the Virtual Shot app itself. And when you first get your Virtual Shot, you have to download the app to your phone from the App Store. And then once you get the app installed, you have to set up an account. And this is where I ran into one of the first issues with my Virtual Shot. I had some password issues, and I had to contact Virtual Shot to have them help reset the password. And as I mentioned a little while ago, they're located in Australia. So what that means is when you determine you have a problem that you have to go through customer service to try to rectify, it's the middle of the night in Australia if you're here in the US. So I would figure out that I had a problem and have to contact them via email. They wouldn't see the email until it was the middle of the night here, and I wouldn't see their response until the next day. So there's more or less a built-in 24-hour delay if you have to contact Virtual Shot customer service for one thing or another. When the app starts up, as you see, you've got a safety checklist to go through to make sure that you're not going to do any kind of damage to yourself or anything else. And once you complete that, it takes you to this screen. And there's going to be a lot of different configuration. I'll talk about some of the things that you'll see down the right hand side here, as well as some of the settings. But for right now, what I want to do is just go to the open range so you can see sort of what this thing does. And here you can see it has taken us to a range. Now, I don't have this connected to my rifle currently. I have the phone in a tripod, but you'll see that it senses the movement of the phone just like you would be looking through an actual optic on your firearm. And when we bring up the target, as I'll do right here, you can see that I now have the target aligned in my sights, more or less. Again, I'm sort of guesstimating because it's hard for me to see with the phone the way it's configured right now. The virtual shot system uses the sensors on the phone to detect that movement. It also uses the phone's microphones to detect the hammer falling to fire a shot. I'm going to simulate firing a shot right now. And I believe that worked. Yes, it did. And it should have registered a shot on the target. So that's basically the way virtual shot works when you set it up, install it, and start using it with your firearm. So you can see I'm back to this screen, and as I said, there are a number of options going down along the left here. The skills development section actually has instructional videos, and I looked through some of these. They're essentially basic marksmanship principles that are being taught by the people who developed the system, and they seem to be pretty decent. When we go to training levels, I notice here, and this occurs in some other places with virtual shot, that I am locked out of all but the very first level. And I don't know if this is something that eventually unlocks when you reach a certain level of performance with virtual shot, or if this is something you have to pay for to get into additional levels. And one of the problems I've had with virtual shot since I first opened the box is a lack of any kind of instructions. There's nothing I can find in the app itself. There is very little on the website for virtual shot, and there's just a lot of things you don't know. So the first thing I would recommend for virtual shot would be to come up with some very detailed instructions so that people who are using the system understand how it's supposed to work. There are games on here, and I'll show you one of these. Let's start out with the zombie, just because that one was one I was playing with yesterday. And with the zombie game, you're going to see... Okay, it took me a moment to get this zombie game started. I actually tried this once, and I'm going to have to redo it just because I messed up. But this will give you an idea of how this works. And you'll see that the sensors in the phone track the movement, and your view through the reticle of the scope that we see in the lower right hand corner there basically is what you're going to be looking at as the shooter. Now, I'm looking around right now. I don't see any zombies just yet. And with this particular game, I think you have to create some sort of noise to begin with. So I'm just going to simulate firing a shot here. That looks like it did the trick. And now we should see some zombies starting to head this way. Yeah, I think we've got one. Yeah, there we go. There's a zombie coming at us. And I don't see any other ones just yet. But we'll see if we can dust him off. Yep, looks like we got him. So that gives you an idea. Oh, I guess I didn't quite finish him off there. There comes a faster one. We'll have to try to get him quick. Got him. So that's essentially the way the app works, and this is just a game. But I can see some training value to this. Obviously, with tracking targets and timing your trigger squeeze and all that to go along with your dry fire practice. So I do think there is some practical benefit with even these games, and there the zombie finally got me, when we're using the virtual shot. This game simulates the famous or infamous incident known as Black Hawk Down, and I'm not sure how I feel about that being used in a game, but I wanted to use this for a reason. we're going to start to see bad guys. There's a bad guy firing at us down there. And let's see if I can hit him. And it looks like I'm not going to be able to. But one of the things I've noticed is with these games, whenever there are bad guys, they are all bad guys. And I think something that would really enhance Virtual Shot would be a judgmental aspect where the shooter had to evaluate whether or not the individuals in the screen were an imminent lethal threat. And that is something that would not only enhance the training value of the game, but could literally save someone's life or save multiple people's lives if you think of someone being involved in a shooting that was non-justifiable. And if we would add something like that to the marksmanship aspects that I mentioned a minute ago, we would have something that would be a great indoor training aid for, well, let's see, ammo droughts, pandemic lockdowns, inclement weather, or whatever other catastrophe might come along to prevent us from going to the range for live fire training. One more thing before I completely leave the app. There is a lot of configuration in here. We've got a lot of settings, and I'll see if I can bring that up. So you can actually change your units of measure. You can change your scope position. I've got it on the lower right hand side now. You can put it in the center. You can put it on the left, so it'll accommodate left or right-handed shooters. The trigger reset is something I'll talk about a little bit later, but you can set this up for something like an airsoft rifle that's going to have a trigger that resets itself every time you shoot. Otherwise, with a conventional firearm, every time you squeeze the trigger, you have to recock the firearm in order to be able to fire the next shot. So if you have it configured as I do here now, which is on manual, from the time you fire a shot, it gives you 5 seconds to reset the trigger before it will detect another shot. With something like a bolt action rifle, that's not too bad. With a semi-auto, that's a little weird. But if you use the auto setting, which would be for something like an airsoft rifle, then it only gives you 0.5 of a second between shots for the trigger to reset. So it's not something you're going to be able to use if you're actually using a real firearm and doing dry fire practice. And let me get out of here. You can also configure this for different types of sights. And where you see change ballistics here, you can program in the ballistics for your cartridge. So at distance, you will get proper trajectory for your bullet. You also can program in wind deflection, and you can have to correct for wind. So there are some really advanced features. And one of the things I meant to mention with that zombie game a minute ago, I was messing around with that yesterday with my daughter, and she was actually acting as a spotter, telling me where the zombies were and talking me into them. So you could have some work here for a sniper observer team, being able to work on their communication. That might be another benefit to this. And were it not for some of the things I'm going to talk about here in a little bit, I would have a pretty high opinion of this so far. One thing I do want to mention, and I will bring this up now in the armory, we can change to different types of scope reticles, which is a nice thing to give people who use scoped rifles the opportunity to hopefully get something that's close to the reticle they use. I wish they would go ahead and put red dots on here as options for reticles, because allegedly you can mount the Picatinny mount in front of your red dot sight and use your actual sight for shooting through these levels. And I have had some pretty major problems with that, and I'm still waiting for an email back from the company to explain how it is exactly I'm supposed to configure this to work with an existing red dot. I think that could be solved very easily by just adding 2 or 3 red dot reticle options on here, and maybe throwing in something like an EOTech circle dot reticle and what have you, and doing away with the whole red dot setting entirely. So when you get your Virtual Shot, you are supposed to attach the mount to your firearm, download the app as I mentioned, install your phone and properly line it up with the simulated reticle on the screen, push down so it clamps your phone tightly, and tighten this little screw on the back. Then you start your Virtual Shot with whatever range that you're going to be using. and you are then ready to look for your target, and I realize you can't see this, and fire a shot and continue to work on your marksmanship skills through dry firing practice. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. So when you open up the box for your virtual shot for the very first time, you will find this quick start guide, and that is it for any sort of instructions that come along with the virtual shot. And there's nothing on the back here. So no diagrams, no drawings, no nothing like that. And certainly not any sort of detailed instructions. So I had to go to the virtual shot website to get an idea of exactly how you're supposed to mount the mount in regards to the placement with the other sights that you might already have on your rifle. And through the photographs that I saw there, I was able to more or less figure it out, but I ran into another issue very, very quickly, and there's a reason that this mount is on my M&P 15 rifle, and that's because this is the only rifle that I could mount this on without having to dismount an existing sight, scope, backup iron sights, or what have you. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a moment. So here is my PSA AR-15 pistol, and this was a prime candidate for mounting the virtual shot when I first got it. The problem that I ran into is with the design of the mount, and I'll see if I can change my focus range here a little bit. This area that the mount requires here was too large to fit in the space between my red dot sight and my backup iron on the PSA. And there was also no way that I could get it underneath here in the front to mount it in front of the red dot, which is another option, and it's a nice option to be able to use your existing red dot sight when you're going through some of these simulations. But because of the spacing of everything on my rail, I just wasn't able to do it. That same problem was then encountered with every other rifle that I considered attaching the virtual shot to until I got to my M&P 15. And as I said, I'm not interested in dismounting any existing sights, scopes, or what have you, and then having to reinstall them when I'm done with a training session. So what comes about is a situation where you either have to pretty much build your rifle from the ground up and space everything accordingly so that you know you're going to be able to use your virtual shot, or you have to set up a dedicated virtual shot firearm, which is essentially what I've done with my M&P 1522. This does, by the way, have a Rock River Arms 2-stage match trigger, which is the same trigger I have in a lot of my existing actual rifles, or maybe I should say centerfire cartridge rifles. So I'm simulating the same type of a trigger, but I don't have the same weight, the same balance, or what have you with this platform as I do with some of my other ARs and my other rifle systems. The next issue that I ran into had to do with the phone clamp. And you'll notice these are just flat surfaces on the top and bottom of the phone clamp. There's no lip that comes over the front or anything else, and really nothing even to align your phone properly. You just have to sort of hold it back against there, squeeze the top and the bottom together, and then tighten that screw that I showed you a little while ago on the back. And I think almost all of us these days have a cover of some sort on our phone. And when I try to install this with the cover, it's almost impossible to get this thing at an exact 90-degree angle to the lens. And also, when I try to squeeze these surfaces together and tighten down that screw, it doesn't get tight enough to keep the phone from moving around. And as you're using this for the various simulations on the screen and you're moving the rifle, the phone will move slightly, and that will cause a movement in your image as though the rifle itself were moving, even though you're not actually moving it. So that's a distraction, and that's something that I really think needs to be upgraded to hold that phone better. And again, there needs to be a recognition that phones are probably going to be in some sort of a case. I think if these surfaces were extended and there was a lip put in front to hold that in better, maybe even a lip that would extend slightly so you could adjust it for the size of your phone, that would help tremendously. One thing I discovered completely by accident with the virtual shot was how to adjust the focus. And I noticed when I was looking through the lens, the image that I was seeing on my phone screen was not real sharp. And I'm going to remove my phone to try to be able to show you this a little bit easier. There is a large nut right here that can be loosened, and when you loosen it, as I will do, it allows the lens portion to be moved fore and aft, or you can completely remove it as I did there. And to adjust the focus, you adjust how close the lens is to your phone screen. And you'll find the place through trial and error where it's in good sharp focus, and then you have to hold everything together and tighten that nut back down, and that will then hold the eyepiece in place. The next thing I want to discuss is the trigger, or more specifically, the trigger reset. Now, as I mentioned, you have to either select manual mode or auto mode for the particular platform that you're using. And if you're using an actual firearm, you're probably going to have to operate it on manual mode because you can't fire live ammunition, obviously. So with something like a bolt system, that I don't see a problem with that because you would have to cycle the bolt after each and every shot. So no problem there. But with a semi-auto platform like an AR or something similar, having to stop and reset the trigger every time is just not realistic. And this might be something that could be addressed by the factory with something as simple as a replacement trigger group that would allow multiple simulated shots. Now, you would not be using your exact same trigger from your firearm, which is one of the benefits of the way it's set up now, but at least it would give you something that you could continue firing multiple shots with that firearm when you're undergoing the simulations. Another option would also be to set up an airsoft rifle or something similar that has a trigger that automatically resets, and try to configure it exactly the same as your real rifle and try to use that for training purposes. But a lot of the airsoft rifles that I have worked with over the years have had triggers that feel more like you're turning on and off a light switch than you are squeezing the trigger of a real firearm. So some of that depends on the specific airsoft rifle and how realistic its action is as compared to a true firearm. The next thing I ran into is also related to trigger reset, but it also has to do with the shot detection of the virtual shot. And one of the things that I ran into is you will fire a simulated shot, i.e. squeeze the trigger to dry fire your firearm, but the system doesn't hear the shot. It doesn't register the shot as having fired. So I will then cycle the action, and it picks up the action cycling as the shot, and it fires a simulated shot on the screen that you didn't intend to fire. And then, now that you have the trigger reset, you can't squeeze the trigger again for 5 seconds because of that manual trigger reset time. And in the meantime, all sorts of things are happening on screen, and it starts to become frustrating after a while. Now, in the settings for the app, it does specify that you can change the sensitivity of your virtual shot when it comes to hearing the shots. But when you have a situation like I just described, which way do you go? Because the sensitivity wasn't great enough to hear the first shot that you intentionally tried to fire, but it was too sensitive when you cycled the action and it picked that up as a shot. And then again, it feels like that toy you got for Christmas once as a kid and you were all excited about it until you got it out of the box, and like I said, it just didn't work the way you thought it was going to work. Another problem that I've run into and still have not been able to solve yet, in fact, I've been waiting for about 2 days now for a response from Virtual Shot as to how to address this, has to do with using Virtual Shot in the red dot mode. And in the red dot mode, you can actually move the mount to a location in front of your existing red dot and use your real sight when you're doing your dry fire training practice, which I think is a really good option to be able to use the equipment that you would be normally using. The problem is when I put the sight, or the system I should say, in red dot mode and move it to in front of my red dot, it does not align properly. I have to hold the rifle at about a 45-degree upward angle to be able to see what should be a shot straight in front of me. So there's some sort of a setup or a configuration error there, and I've tried adjusting it with the settings and the adjustments that are part of the app, and I've just not been able to rectify that yet. Now that could be me and my lack of savvy when it comes to tech items, or it could be a problem with this particular app. I'm not sure, but as I said, I'm still waiting for a response back from Virtual Shot as to how to go about trying to fix that problem. The last couple of things I'll mention are minor, but if anyone from Virtual Shot sees this and it's something they might want to think about incorporating into the system, it might be good for some shooters. The first is there is currently no option for iron-sighted shooting. It would be nice either for someone who uses the iron sights as their primary to be able to have an option for training with that on the Virtual Shot, or for someone that wants to practice using their backup iron sights if they could use that on the Virtual Shot system. And the other thing I'll mention is, since it is dry fire practice, there's obviously no recoil. But depending upon what you're shooting and what it's chambered for, recoil could have a very definite impact on your accuracy. So some sort of a simulated recoil inducer would also be something that might be a good idea, and I think that could probably be configured in conjunction with that trigger system that I was talking about a little while ago, particularly in an AR that could replace the buffer with something that would try to simulate some sort of recoil that you would get with your firearm and have to get back on target after you experience that recoil impulse. Okay folks, I didn't want to leave this video without giving you a look at Virtual Shot in action, and as I'm talking it looks like it just fired a shot on its own. By the way, if what I'm trying to do here actually works, I deserve some sort of an award for marine engineering, because I'm basically beaming the Virtual Shot phone image to my big TV, and I've got my camera pointed at the TV to record what's going on. So this is kind of a new endeavor for me, and now I'm actually going to try to fire a shot, and it looks like that shot was pretty good. Now one thing I don't know as I'm looking at this, and it looks like, now there was a situation where I cycled the action and it registered it as a shot. So as I said, that's one of the problems that I have with this. But I don't know what this distance is supposed to be. Now it is possible to increase my scope power to get a larger image, which we should be able to see now. Oh yeah, look at that. So again, I can see some benefit to this, and you do have to hold the rifle steadily. You do have to apply a good trigger squeeze. And again, there's another shot that registered all by itself. And let me switch to a different screen here. I haven't looked at Junkyard yet. We'll see what this one is. Get the highest score in 1 minute. All right. And for some reason, it's now not registering shots at all. Okay, and I see what's going on now. It's registering me cycling the action as a shot. Okay, and that was the problem. And there was a shot that it just didn't register. And it registered me cocking the action as a shot. In any case, you get an idea how it works, and you can see as I'm moving the rifle, it's tracking just like you would have if you were actually doing this on a range. So I do see a lot of potential with this system. So what are my conclusions regarding Virtual Shot? What I'll say is, I think the system is about 75% of the way of being developed to being a very, very good and useful system. but it's that remaining 25% that is the fly in the ointment. I think in its current state, for novice shooters, video gamers, maybe airsoft shooters that already have a semi-auto platform that'll work with virtual shot, it has some potential good benefits. For the professional shooters, for instructors, first and foremost, it needs to have more detailed setup and usage instructions, either video instructions on the Virtual Shot website or some sort of tutorial in the app itself so that the instructor can go through and know exactly how to set everything up, what all the settings do, and how to properly use Virtual Shot. Moreover, I think for at least the AR-15 platform, which is going to be one of the most popular firearms that Virtual Shot is going to be used with, a replacement trigger system so that you could set it up with a trigger that would continue to cycle, and particularly if it could be designed with no hammer so there was no way of accidentally firing a live round if somehow it made it into the chamber, that would be nice. Hand in hand with that, a buffer replacement that would simulate recoil for the 5.56 cartridge would be a very nice enhancement. So little things like that would go a long way. I think too, the mount needs to be redesigned. It needs to be designed so it takes up less rail space and maybe even in a way so it could go in underneath an existing optic and then come out and around the front to be able to use it with some of the sights and scopes and backup irons and what have you that you might already have on your firearm, rather than its current configuration that requires you to almost set up your firearm with the idea you're going to be using Virtual Shot. That redesign should also include a modification to the clamp portion of the mount that holds the phone so that it holds the phone tightly even if you have a case on your phone and prevents that moving around that I was talking about before, because as I said, that can affect the image on your screen and actually show movement on your screen that's not in accordance with the way the rifle is moving just because that phone is sort of wiggling and jiggling around in there. I think these jaws need to be a little bit longer. There needs to be a pronounced lip on the front to hold that phone in place, and maybe something to help align the phone so you don't have an issue with it being cocked a little bit to the rear or a little bit to the front, and making sure that you do have an exact 90-degree image with your Virtual Shot. Coming up with something that was a little bit more sophisticated for the focus than just loosening this large nut and sliding the lens back and forth would also be a nice feature. I don't see that as essential. That's more of a nice to have than a need to have with the current system. For the phone app, I would like to see some CQB courses, assuming there are none in there in those courses that are locked and I can't get to and don't know why I can't get to them. But that would be a nice upgrade, as well as maybe throwing in a national match course. That would be good. I think coming up with red dot reticles that are just replacements for those scope reticles that I showed you earlier would be a very nice thing, and doing away with the whole red dot portion of the app altogether. That way the shooter could just select whatever red dot, and they could put 2, 3, 4 different dot sizes in there, and maybe a circle dot if somebody uses an EOTech, and that would simplify it, and you wouldn't have to worry about trying to calibrate the Virtual Shot with your existing red dot, but you would have that image. And let's face it, red dots are basically just red dots. So whereas depending upon the type of scope someone uses, the difference in the reticle could be very important if they are trying to train with, say, a Horus reticle or something like that. The red dots, again, are pretty simple, and it's just a red dot. And just having that as an option to be selected in the reticles, I think, would simplify the app and make it a little bit easier when it comes to the setup of the Virtual Shot. Also, as I mentioned earlier, adding a judgmental aspect to the app where shooters have to distinguish between an imminent lethal threat and an innocent person in their field of view rather than just blazing away at anything that moves, I think would be a tremendous enhancement to the training aspect of this app. And I would also like to see an iron sight option so that you could train either with irons as your primary sights for anyone who still does that, or train with them as backup iron sights in case your primary optic goes down. So there you go, folks. Those are my thoughts on the Virtual Shot mobile phone shooting simulation system. If you have any questions or comments on this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. Also remember, WarbirdBunker.com is making t-shirts for the channel. If you go to WarbirdBunker.com, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFunk4U, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from WarbirdBunker.com. And lastly, don't forget the new discount code from Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFunk10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from Hot Munitions. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.